Well, I really didn't feel like making a video today. Pretty sick actually, and it's hot as hell here in the shop. But I may not have the opportunity to have all these around ever again. Never do know. And so what I actually have here, well, I've got some I haven't finished. I've got a small block Ford in the back and two FE. Here I've got an FE setup and tire that I'm selling to a local, Casey's and Jeff's. I'm about to box all these up, and these are Jerome's and Ty's, small block Ford. Now, I figured it would be a good opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the differences in all these. First, 61 and 62, I've shown before some of the differences. They're fairly minor. The carbs themselves are actually the same. You find some small differences in hardware. Here we've got some flathead, whereas the 62s have more of the standard Phillips head type fasteners. It's not a big difference, but it's a small difference. These are just set on here. The small block, there are a few different types. I don't have a set here that's for 260s, but the 260 ones are very small. I think the center carb takes a 47 jet. This setup here, Jerome's, is from late 1963. And if you notice the way that the part number and everything is stamped, it's kind of mishmash, kind of like they just decided to do it. These 64s are a bit more standard, like we're used to seeing. And that's September of 63, and this is the last week of September 1964. And matches with the intake, 964. This one here does not have a label. The one thing I've noticed is this one here is a much larger port for coolant than this. It must just be for a sensor. And here's one of the actual intakes. This one's in August of 64. And I know, well, these are all made from Buddy Barr. I know Mr. Cushman mentioned that the 260 ones had a different sized intake manifold. Apparently, I don't have one of those because all three of these are the same size intake ports. If we look at how the linkage works on small block Ford, first, I've always seen them come with manual chokes. I haven't seen any of them as auto choke. Your accelerator rod would attach here, which goes in between these two forward carbs on a bell crank. You have a link from here to the bottom, and that provides some of your primary driving. This is gonna be hard to do because I've only got an inch and a thumb and a loose intake, but we'll open them all the way up like so, and they should all reach wide open throttle at the same time. Got some primary driving and then wide open. One thing that I do have some issue with these is you don't have a heck of a lot of room for a hose between. It's very cramped, very cramped. I would almost consider bending these tabs back a little bit if possible and trying to get a little bit more room. I would hate to have a hose interfere with one of these and bind up the throttle. And here's one without the linkage hooked up yet. And here's an FE setup. The accelerator rod travels all the way forward to here. You have a slightly longer lever, and that travels the bell crank here, which this is one of the little thumb cutters, and runs to the center. And actually from here, there was supposed to be a left hand, one of these little cutters, but they're hard to find. So I drilled it and put a little cotter pin in, figured that'd be easier. And then from there you have the high center pin, and that reaches to the outboards. And you have a bit more progressive on this, on the center carb. And it opens all the way up. And one thing about the 3.2 setups is I really love them. And I say that they're great for street vehicles, but this is a lot of gear. It's a lot of moving parts. It's a lot of things that can bend. And as you can see, like right here, the shaft is bending, which is cool. These throttle shafts are made of brass. The levers are steel, but the actual shafts themselves are brass. And oftentimes, like you can see this one here, it's not really bent, but it's twisted. See how there's a twist in it from being pulled back too hard? I can straighten this out or replace the shaft, and I'll be doing that during assembly. You can see the twist quite visibly there. It's normally the outboards that are a problem with that. So when you're setting these up, it's very important that your throttle stop is not the carburetors. You can bend these shafts and ruin them very easily. And at almost $80 a piece for replacements, times 3, that could be troublesome. And you could bend the steel ones too. Always make sure your throttle stop is at the pedal or somewhere else. You've got, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You've got all these different joints. It's never a bad idea to have a few drops of oil on each little piece. Something that sticks a little, actually, because these work fine as they are, but once you get all the stuff together, that's a lot of gear. It's a lot of different gear. And especially if, you're pushing too hard and you bend a shaft, now you've created more resistance. Some of the differences that I've mentioned on my page before too, that that these run really lean on my car. My car has, a pretty large camshaft and makes 8 or 9 inches of vacuum at idle. And part of the reason for this is the calibration's leaner, but you can't fix it just by drilling out idle feeds. Between when your fuel comes down the idle channel, that's to your transfer slot, it also transfers through a little passage to the mixture screw. On an FE, or on most 4 barrels, that hole is 64 thousandths of an inch, somewhere in that range. On these small block ones, they're only 51. So your mixture screw on its own doesn't really have as much effect. Let's look at the base plates. There's some differences there too. There's these for a small block and for an FE. For the small block, you actually have ported vacuum on one base plate, your center carb. The other two do not have them. They have mixture screw and transfer slot, but it's not drilled. It's not drilled for vacuum advance. So when you set them up, you do have the ability to have vacuum advance, but you need to make sure that's on the center carb. The FE ones, none of them are drilled. Another thing that makes the FEs run richer is you have the hole. It's a 22 to 23, maybe sometimes a 24 thousandths hole below the transfer slot. On the small block Ford, you do not have that. You do not have that. And that adds, even though it sounds like a very small hole, we're talking about 6 24 thousandth holes, seeing full manifold vacuum with the throttle shut. It does make quite a difference. One of the nice things about the FE setup is that hole is seeing, focus, there we go. That hole is seeing manifold vacuum with the throttle completely shut, which makes it really nice because you can, focus again, you can run with the outboard carbs completely shut, and you only set the idle speed with the center carb. That makes it considerably easier But since you have that hole, the transfer slot and the idle circuit's active. So when it finally does open a little bit, it's not going to bog. It's going to be just fine. With the small block Fords, as I mentioned, you do not have that. And so you actually can open up and have just a tiny bit of transfer slot showing. I wouldn't have too much because, you know, once you get up in RPM, it'll start bleeding a lot of fuel. And, you know, the FE have the basket and a 1/2-inch NPT hole in the back for PCV. The small block have them as well, but I've never actually seen them in use. They're always like that. You could use your valve cover ones, but the FE had closed covers, so that wasn't really an option. That's pretty cool. You can still see the original number 79 stamp, or 19 on that carb. That looks like a 5. It's number 19. Now, I've seen other restorers stamp a variety of different bowls and choke horns in different ways, but I'll be honest with you, I've never seen any rhyme or reason for why they're set up that way. One thing I do mention is on the small block setups, the way the fuel log is, the way that it's bent, maybe because the valve covers come at a steep angle, you don't have a lot of room for the hose. And so I'd always just be careful. Just be careful when you set those up. That maybe you have to bend this back a little bit or make some adjustment. As always, test fit 100,000 times before you actually get going. And for what it's worth, every 3.2 setup from the factory I've seen on a factory car came with an automatic choke, and the auto choke uses exhaust heat to open up the bimetallic spring. Electric chokes can be added later, but you need a specific housing, and I have seen dealer installed manual chokes, and I have these set up in the up position, but if you wanted to, you can flip these 180. They could be in the down position. You could find a way to feed it, but I don't know. These didn't come with any sort of bracket to hold the cable. Personally, I just wouldn't bother using the choke, but whatever, that's me. Anyway, if you have any other questions, comments, thoughts, let me know. I've got these here. Be happy to do a little video if possible. All right, thanks.